Russia is deliberately making maximalist claims that it knows cannot be accepted by Ukraine or Europe in order to string out this process, so that no agreement really is reached, because Russia's preference would simply be to keep this going on the battlefield, and it feels that that is the way that it could best meet its aims.
Yeah, so they just seem reasonable to Donald Trump, but not reasonable to anyone else in the world. Is
Yeah,
their MO?
exactly, and that would obviously defer Trump's threats to put on these secondary sanctions that could hobble the export of Russian oil, which really is what is financing this war.
European leaders are pushing Washington to ramp up sanctions on Russia before Trump meets Putin in Alaska on Friday, calling the talks a critical moment for Ukraine's future. Perhaps unhelpfully, although certainly predictably, Vice President J.D. Vance says both Russia and Ukraine will likely be unhappy with any peace deal agreed, and that the US is done funding the war. Europe is keen that Volodymyr Zelensky is invited, and the US have not ruled it out. Catherine Philp is the Times' World Affairs editor, joins us from Kyiv. She's been our guide as we try and understand over the last 6 months precisely what is going on with the prospect for peace. Catherine, good morning to you.
Good morning, Stig.
Vance is probably just saying the quiet bit out loud, and it lends fuel to the speculation that these talks are not necessarily going to be great news for Ukraine.
I think that's right, yes. I mean, Vance seemed to sort of aim most of his fire on the issue of the Americans paying Ukraine's military bills. But I mean, that's an issue that's already been sorted out. The Europe is going to be footing the bill. So, I mean, there is some confusion I think, on the American side about what exactly they've agreed to. Though we have heard from Putin an outline of what they're after, which it does sound very bad for Ukraine, which is a full withdrawal from the 4 Ukrainian regions that Russia has claimed are part of Russia, the Russian Federation. So if that is the basis on which these talks begin, it is a back foot for Ukraine to start on, if indeed Ukraine has any representation in these meetings. As we know, it is going to be Trump on Putin, but that this prospect has been dangled that there may be some way of getting Zelensky into a meeting, if not the meeting.
It's interesting, as ever, though, that it's those two plus Zelensky. So however you look at it, one of the other side in this war, the invaded party, Russia versus Ukraine. Ukraine is very much the weak sister in this, isn't it? Ukraine is not regarded with the same level of respect as Russia by the Americans.
No, not remotely. And, the fact that it won't be in this initial meeting at all, that may be just something that comes later. I mean, the mere fact that these talks are going to happen in Alaska is, it really could hardly be more symbolic. It's so far away from Europe. It's where America and Russia meet across the Bering Strait. And the way in which it sort of symbolizes the fact that this is a Washington to Moscow conversation that totally excludes not only Ukraine but the rest of Europe as well. It could hardly be more geographically significant.
Russia wants to keep areas like the Donbass in the east and Crimea. Is there any suggestion at this point of some sort of land swap, of something that Ukraine would get back?
Yeah, I think this talk of a land swap is incredibly misleading.
Yeah, what does it mean even? It just sounds like a cliche ready form, doesn't it?
Yeah, so the only land that Ukraine could possibly swap back. The only land that could possibly be swapped would be a Russian-held Ukrainian territory in Sumy and around Kharkiv Oblast, because Ukraine doesn't actually really control any Russian territory anymore. There's sorry about this. There's There was this area of Russia that Ukraine held for a time, but it's been chased out of almost all of that. So, what Ukraine would be asked to do if there were a land swap is effectively swap. It would be swaps of Russian-held territory.
Yeah.
It would be Russia agreeing to withdraw from those other places, those other oblasts, in return for taking over even larger parts of the Donbass, so perhaps the rest of Donetsk province, which Russia has not managed to completely occupy yet. That would be very, very dangerous indeed, because there is a sort of string of towns known as the sort of fortification line that has stopped Russia getting any further into Ukraine. And if Ukraine were made to hand over the rest of Donetsk province, it would leave the rest of Ukraine incredibly vulnerable to a Russian advance.
And the point you're making just finally, Catherine, the idea that this couldn't be any further from Europe. There was some talk last week where a European should be in the room to discuss this, because whenever we've spoken to Russian representatives, they say their biggest point in all of this is that Ukraine should never be allowed to join NATO and European forces should never guarantee their security. They regard that as an act of aggression towards Russia. Could that be something that Trump is willing to concede, actually, on behalf of Europe, even though Europe isn't actually in the room?
I think that's entirely possible. There's also the possibility that Russia is deliberately making maximalist claims that it knows cannot be accepted by Ukraine or Europe in order to string out this process, so that no agreement really is reached, because Russia's preference would simply be to keep this going on the battlefield. And it feels that is the way that it could best meet its aims.
Yeah, so they just seem reasonable to Donald Trump, but not reasonable to anyone else in the world, is their MO.
Exactly, and that would defer Trump's threats to put on these secondary sanctions that could hobble the export of Russian oil, which really is what is financing this war. I mean, the Russian economy isn't in a great state, but so those sanctions could be in the future very detrimental to Russia's ability to continue to wage this war. But as we've seen, this setting up this meeting in Alaska saw Trump blow through his latest deadline, which was on Friday, for imposing those sanctions. So again, we've seen that he's highly susceptible to Russian pressure to put off these measures that would actually have an effect.
So interesting, Catherine. Good to speak to you as ever. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
That's Catherine Philp, the Times' World Affairs editor. She's in Kyiv. It's yet another week begins, Kate, where we look ahead to Friday without a great deal of expectation. I mean, something's definitely going to happen because that summit is going to happen in Alaska. But when you hear what Vance says, when you hear what could possibly be on the table, maybe Zelensky will show up later on. But if you're invited to a meeting and there's two people there for the first couple of hours and you're invited for the last half hour,
it's not good, is it?
It's not. There's no way that it turns out well for you, is it? The third party to that.
No, but you're right. It is another week of waiting. It has, though, focused minds, I think, across Europe. And there are now quite hurried discussions going on to try and work out what Europe's approach will be, whatever America decides or whatever happens in this meeting with Vladimir Putin.